Donald Trump is on track for a historic landslide victory in the 2024 presidential election. He's leading in all the polls, but it wasn't always like this. If you remember back in 2020, Joe Biden was ahead by ridiculous margins throughout the election cycle. Exactly 4 years ago, on October 18, 2020, Joe Biden led by 10.7% in the national polling average. He eventually won the popular vote by just 4.5%, which means that polling overestimated support for Democrats by a whopping 6.2 percentage points. Today, we're going to take a look at the 2024 polling, but adjust it for the 2020 era and fill in the map so you can visualize how strong a position Trump is in right now, with less than 20 days to go until November 5. With all these solid states filled in, we're only going to focus on the races that will actually be competitive, the races that will truly matter. We're going to start in the Midwest, where the election will be decided. These are the most important states on the map, and we'll begin with Minnesota, a state no Democrat has lost since 1972. Today, Kamala Harris leads by 4.7% in the polling average. But if Democrats are overestimated by 6.2 percentage points again, Trump would be on track to win the state by 1.5%. This is definitely not impossible. Just look at what happened in 2016. Hillary Clinton only won Minnesota by 1.5 percentage points. Trump winning it by that same margin is certainly within the realm of possibility. So right off the bat, Minnesota is going to be a lean red state. Any state on track to go in favor of either candidate by 10 points or more is going to be solid. Anything 5 points or more is likely. 1 to 5 is lean. And any margin less than 1% is going to be categorized as tilt. Next up is Iowa. Polls have Trump leading by 4%, but adjusting for the error, Trump is set to win the state by 10.2%. He won it by 9% in 2016 and by 8% in 2020. There's no doubt he can win Iowa by a solid double-digit margin. Then we come to Wisconsin, one of the most competitive states in the country, at least based on pure data. Harris actually has a 0.3% lead. This is the only battleground state where she still maintains a slight advantage based purely on the polling average. The three most recent polls show a tie. However, polling overestimated Democrats significantly in the last two elections. Clinton was supposed to win Wisconsin by 6 points in 2016, but she lost the state entirely. Biden was supposed to win by 6.3%, yet he won the state by just 0.6%. Today, the adjusted margin has Trump ahead by 5.9%, so Wisconsin isn't even going to be close. It's going to be a likely red state on our map. In neighboring Michigan, Trump is also dominating. In 2020, it was the most liberal of all the swing states. Biden carried the Wolverine state by 2.8%. However, today, Democrats are behind in the polls, with Trump leading by a 1% margin. He's ahead in a majority of recent polls, and there is no doubt he's the clear favorite to flip Michigan, a state he won very narrowly in 2016 by just 0.2%. Once again, as in Wisconsin, polling has heavily overestimated Democrats in past elections. In 2016, Clinton was supposed to win by 11.4%, but she didn't even win the state. Biden also massively underperformed. The 2024 adjusted margin shows Trump leading by 7.2%, so Michigan is likely to go Republican. Moving on to Ohio, the Buckeye State, which Trump flipped in 2016 and has been red ever since. This time around, he's going to win it by a double-digit margin. He already leads by 7.4% in the polls, and adjusting for the 2020 error, Trump is on track to carry the state by 13.6%. The Buckeye State is going to be solid red for the first time in nearly 3 decades. Before I continue, nearly 3/4 of you aren't subscribed, so please take a moment to subscribe now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. You can also join my Discord server to chat with me personally. Link in the description below. Now, to finish up the Rust Belt, in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania, Trump leads by 0.3% in the polling average. He's already dominating and leads in an overwhelming majority of the polls. This is probably going to be the most right-leaning of the 3 former Blue Wall states. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are showing a clear trend when adjusted for the 2020 polling error. Trump is projected to carry Pennsylvania by 6.5%. And just like in its neighboring states, Democrats have been heavily overestimated here. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was supposed to win Pennsylvania by 7%, but she didn't even carry the state. The current polls show a near tie between Harris and Trump, which is a very good sign for the former president. For the first time, he isn't getting blown out in the polling averages, even though he consistently outperforms the polls. In 2016, he won the election despite polls predicting a landslide loss to Hillary Clinton. And in 2020, Biden was expected to win by an even larger margin, but the race was much closer. It all came down to Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, which Biden won by less than 0.7%. If Trump had flipped those three states, he would have won the election. Today, Trump is in a much stronger position. Like Wisconsin and Michigan, Pennsylvania is going to be likely red. In Nebraska's 2nd district, Kamala Harris leads by 10 points, but after adjusting for polling errors, she's up by 3.8%. This makes it lean blue in favor of Harris. Moving up to the Northeast, Harris is expected to win New York by 12 to 13 points, which is already the worst performance for a Democrat in the state since 1988. In comparison, Biden won New York by 23 points in 2020. After adjusting the margin, Harris leads by just 7.3%, making New York likely blue. In New Hampshire, Harris leads by 7.4%, but after adjustment, she's ahead by just 1.2%. The state is nearly as competitive as it was in 2016, when Hillary Clinton won it by just 0.37%. So while it might seem like a stretch, New Hampshire could get very competitive, especially with Trump on the ballot. As a result, it's going to be lean blue, just barely above the 1% threshold to avoid being considered tilt. In Maine, Harris leads by 11.7% on average, but the polling is flawed. Some polls, like the UNH poll, are particularly inaccurate. There's no chance Harris will win the state by a double-digit margin, much less by 17%. Adjusting for errors, Harris leads by 5.5%, making Maine likely blue. Now, moving into the Sun Belt, which is essentially the second theater of this election, we have one battleground in the Midwest, including Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and now Minnesota, which has also become competitive. Down south, we have the Sun Belt, which has traditionally been Republican-controlled. In 2012 and 2016, it was solidly red. However, in 2020, Biden flipped Georgia and Arizona, marking a strong finish for Democrats. But it's unlikely Kamala Harris will repeat that success this time around. Starting with Virginia, Harris leads by 6.4% in the polling average. But after adjusting the margin, she's ahead by just 0.2%. This means she will barely cross the finish line, with the narrowest victory possible. Virginia is going to be very competitive this election cycle, with only 0.2% separating the vice president from the former president, making it a tilt blue state. Before we continue, I want to tell you about Polymarket, the world's largest prediction market, where you can track election results and instantly see who's leading. These odds react in real time to current events, without the lag or bias of polls. Polymarket recently launched a mobile app where you can access their 2024 election forecast on the go. Check them out at polymarket.com and download their new app from the App Store. Now, let's move on to North Carolina. Trump won North Carolina's 16 electoral votes in both 2016 and 2020. And today, he leads by 1.2% in the polling average. He's ahead in every single poll, with the exception of a recent Quinnipiac poll, which used a notably left-leaning sample. Polls in both 2016 and 2020 showed Democrats on track to win, but of course, that never materialized. Today, Trump's adjusted margin is double what it was in 2016, when he won the state by 3.7%. Based on the new numbers, North Carolina is going to be classified as likely red, just like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Trump is dominating in virtually every swing state. Next up is Georgia, which had the most competitive race of the 2020 cycle, decided by less than 0.25 percentage point. Joe Biden won Georgia by 0.24%, marking the first time a Democrat had carried the Peach State since 1992. While Biden did well in Georgia 4 years ago, Kamala Harris isn't close to being the strong candidate Biden was in the last election. Biden performed well in a crowded primary field, but Harris has struggled to maintain momentum. She's floundering in debates and interviews, failing to campaign effectively, and isn't as likable as Democrats would hope. Additionally, choosing Tim Walz as her running mate was a mistake. Josh Shapiro would have been a better choice. Democrats were overconfident back in August when polls looked favorable, but that's no longer the case. Trump now leads by 0.9% in Georgia, and with the adjusted margin, he's on track to win the state by a significant 7.1%. Surpassing his 2016 margin when he defeated Clinton by 5 points. As a result, Georgia is likely red on the map. Florida, long known for its competitiveness, is another state to watch. In the 2000 election, the state was decided by just 537 votes in favor of George W. Bush over Al Gore. In 2012, Florida was a tilt blue state in favor of Obama, but that was the last time Democrats won there. In 2016, Trump carried Florida by a tilt margin, and in 2020, Despite predictions that Biden would win it back, Trump improved on his performance, winning by 3.2%. Today, Florida is even more Republican-leaning than it was 4 years ago. In 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election by a massive 19-point margin, solidifying Republican control over the state. According to the polling average, Trump leads by 6.1%, and the adjusted margin shows him up by 12.3%, making Florida solid red on the map. Next, in Texas, Democrats have little chance of winning. Trump is leading by 6 points in the polls, matching his margin from 2020. 4 years ago, the polls showed Trump barely ahead by just 1%, but now he's polling much stronger. The adjusted margin has Trump leading by a double-digit margin, leaving no doubt that he will carry Texas. While the state is gradually shifting to the left, Texas, with its 40 electoral votes, remains solidly Republican for the foreseeable future. It will take Democrats decades to flip Texas, and by the time that happens, the Midwest will likely be reliably red, handing Republicans even more electoral votes. So today, Texas is projected to be solid red based on the adjusted margin. Continuing westward to Colorado and New Mexico, we have two races that Joe Biden easily won by double-digit margins in the last election. Colorado by 14 points and New Mexico by 11. However, today, these races are much more competitive. In Colorado, the adjusted margin has Kamala Harris leading by just 4.8%, making it a lean blue state, the most competitive it's been since the early 2000s. In New Mexico, Harris leads by 8 points on average, but with the adjusted margin, she's ahead by just 1.8%. New Mexico is also going to be a lean blue state, barely missing out on being classified as a tilt state. While Virginia is expected to be close, Colorado and New Mexico won't be far behind. Moving on to Arizona, we have another state Biden won in the last election. Like Georgia, Arizona was incredibly competitive. It was actually the second closest state on the entire map. It was the first time Democrats won Arizona since 1996. However, Harris is unlikely to replicate Biden's success. She isn't even leading in the polls. In fact, she's down by over 1%. Trump leads by 1.1% in the polling average, and the latest New York Times poll has him ahead by 5 points. The adjusted margin shows Trump on track to win Arizona by 7.3%, so Arizona is going to be a likely Republican state. Finally, we have Nevada. While it's not going to single-handedly decide the election, Nevada is still a swing state with 6 electoral votes. There's no realistic scenario where either Harris or Trump needs Nevada to win, but a victory for Trump in the Silver State would be a symbolic win. Much like Minnesota, Nevada hasn't gone red since 2004, when George W. Bush was the last GOP candidate to win it. It flipped blue in 2008, with Obama carrying it by nearly 13 points, and he won it by 7 in 2012. In both 2016 and 2020, Democrats carried Nevada by 2.4%. However, in 2022, Republicans won the governorship, signaling a shift toward the right. Trump is on track to flip Nevada based on the polling averages, leading by half a percentage point. With the adjusted margin, Trump is projected to defeat Harris by 6.7%, making Nevada likely Republican. So based on the 2024 polls adjusted for the 2020 error, Donald Trump is on track to win 322 electoral votes, sweeping all the swing states and even flipping Minnesota, which would make him the first Republican to win the state in 52 years. Kamala Harris will barely hold on to states like Virginia, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, but it's shaping up to be a very competitive election. Now, some of you might think this projection is far-fetched. While this is not the most likely scenario, if you look back to 2020, polls were projecting similar results for Joe Biden. He was expected to win 330, and sometimes even upwards of 360 electoral votes. That's how drastically the polls overestimated Democrats in the last election. The purpose of this video is to show, in context with past polling errors, just how well Trump is truly doing. He really is on a pathway to victory, even if it isn't by the margins shown here. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content leading up to the election in November. You can also follow me on Twitter for daily political updates. Link is in the description below.